LOL take two. LOL take two. LOL take two. Now listen.
Knock, knock. Who's there? Sam and Janet. Sam and Janet who? Sam and Janet evening. Ha ha! Get it? That is actually a joke from a show I did 100 years ago called Good Evening. Yes, it's silly, but it always manages to get at least a chuckle. And unless you get the Some Enchanted Evening melody wrong, it's kind of hard to mess up. I can't tell jokes to save my life. Jokes meaning setup, punchline. Nope, not my forte. In fact, I suck. And I can prove it. It's been documented. But more on that later. Thankfully, I was exposed to humor at a very early age, which profoundly affected me. Carol Burnett's weekly variety show started when I was 4 years old, and I don't remember a Saturday night where I wasn't glued to the TV watching it. I memorized Carol and Harvey and Tim's characters and sketches and would do them in my backyard, at school, and, for anybody who would listen. My folks had a comedy album by a guy named Tom Lehrer. He was a Harvard math professor who was writing very funny, original songs about all the trouble going on in the 60s, and there was plenty. The Vietnam War, new math, pollution, and the Catholic Church. Even though I didn't completely get all his humor or why the audience on the record was howling with laughter, I memorized all those songs and would do them in my backyard, at school, and, for anybody who would listen. On October 27th, 1970, I crossed over the threshold to become a committed, lifelong creative person. That is also the same year I discovered Lily Tomlin. Coincidence? Maybe. She had joined the cast of the weekly TV show Laugh-In. The show was mostly a series of one-liners, physical comedy, and running gags. But then there was Lily. Even though her two most popular characters, the precocious 5.5-year-old Edith Add and her snarky telephone operator, Ernestine, did short bits like everybody else on the show, Lily's characters resonated with me because they seemed like real people who were just in odd circumstances. When I was 9, Lily recorded a whole Edith Ann album. It wasn't jokes. It was just a conversation between little Edith meeting this new lady who had moved into the neighborhood, also played by Lily. The situations and world that the album created were hysterical. I adored it, and I wore out that record. She also did an Ernestine record. I memorized both records and would do them in my backyard, at school, and, for anybody who would listen. There was a guy in Iowa named Bill Riley who had a weekly local talent show for kids. He'd start his talent search at schools, and if you made it further, you scored an appearance on his weekly TV show, and you also got to appear at the Iowa State Fair in August. It was like a really low-budget version of America's Got Talent. Kids sang, danced, twirled batons, and I went on and did a set of Lily Tomlin material as Edith Ann and Ernestine. And I made it from the original audition at Olmsted Elementary School to his TV show to the Iowa State Fair show. I don't remember if we won anything. Maybe some bacon from Hy-Vee. Around that same time, Monty Python's Flying Circus was a hit on PBS. They were a group of British guys who did wacky characters, and because the entire group was men, they played all the parts, men and women. They had one token actress named Carol Cleveland, whom they used when they needed a real sexy girl or a woman running down the street in her bra. When my friend Tony and I made our movies, we had no problems playing multiple characters, including women's roles, if my sister or our favorite actress Martha wasn't available. We did a version of Blake Edwards' movie 10 and called it 9, starring my sister as Bo Derek. I shot, directed, and edited that movie, but I also played a foul-mouthed landlady who was a lot like Ruth Gordon in Every Which Way But Loose. I also played a nudist next-door neighbor in a hot tub. Yes, we took a few liberties with the original movie. I was babysitting a lot when Saturday Night Live debuted, and I always watched it after the kids went to bed. Gilda Radner's characters were the ones I liked best. She even went to Broadway with a one-woman show, and I got that album and memorized it. My friend Tony and I started doing comedy shows in my garage and in friends' basements that we called Urbandale Gigolos Live. We did our favorite Gilda characters. I did Lisa Loopner. Tony did Emily Latella. But then we started doing characters we created ourselves based on people we knew. Tony did our crazy history teacher, Mrs. Calvin, and I did our peer helpers teacher, Mrs. Robbins, and Tony's grandmother, Marge, and the kids just ate it up. After arriving in LA, you soon realized you were one of 8 gazillion people going up for the same jobs. So in order to be seen, you have to get yourself out there. I had started writing comedic songs like Tom Lehrer used to write, and I figured if I could get those out there, I would be swept up immediately and land on a TV show. The easiest way to get out there was to sign up for open mic nights around town. And there were 2 kinds, stand-up open mic nights and singers open mic nights. Stand-up was huge in the 80s, as so many people were being pulled from stand-up obscurity to their own sitcoms. So I tried that. I mean, how hard could it be? Let me tell you, it's hard. It's really hard. After you signed up with the person running the evening, you had to wait around until they announced you. And then you'd have about 5 minutes to do your stuff. As a nobody, you usually didn't go on until the end of the night. I signed up for open mic nights at the Improv, the Comedy Store, and Carlos and Charlie's on the Sunset Strip. I always seemed to have to go on after the filthiest stand-up comic in the group. One time, I was on next to last, and there were about 3 people left in the audience, and the guy before me did his whole 5 minutes on the veins in his wife's breasts. Lovely. By the time I came on and saying, "I'm just a dude from Des Moines," the audience was getting their checks and hitting the road. The last stand-up place I performed at was called Igby's, and it was in Santa Monica. My roommate Katie came with me, and we lugged my huge 80s boombox so we could audio tape my performance. Katie and I took a seat near the curtained back door until it was my turn to get up. They announced me, and I went on stage in my blue and white striped preppy sweater and froze. Suddenly, I couldn't think of anything to say, let alone something funny. I took a deep breath and said, "It's spring." I have no idea where in the hell that came from or why I said that. I motioned for them to start the music for my comedy song, The Ballad of Vanna White. During the song, I looked at these girls sitting in the front row, staring me down and shaking their heads in disgust. As you can imagine, this did not help my act. The song was a bust. I was a bust. I finished it to a smattering of applause, mostly from Katie in the back of the room. I'm Tony Adelman. Thank you. Thank you very much. I did the walk of shame across the entire room back to our table as the next poor comic who had to follow me was going on. Katie said, "Sorry, Twan, it wasn't that bad." She didn't lie well. Stand-up was just not my thing. I said, "Let's get out of here," grabbing my boombox that was the size of a microwave oven. I parted the curtains to go out the back door so we wouldn't have to walk back through the entire room. The back door had an alarm on it, which we set off. We howled with laughter and took off for our car to drive back to Midtown LA. I took the cassette tape with that performance on it and let it unravel at 65 miles an hour. So somewhere on the 10 freeway, there are 281 feet of plastic cassette tape from 1987 with evidence of me totally bombing at the last time I attempted a stand-up comedy act. After that, I realized that I was probably better suited for the singers' open mic nights. There was this crazy West Hollywood guy named Skip E. Lowe who ran several open mic nights. He was about 2 feet tall, had this gray, yellowish long hair that looked like a dog had peed on it. He wore his hair over one eye like Veronica Lake. He would come on after you performed, throw his hair back and yell, "Come on, let's hear some more for this guy." Those crowds were usually sick of listening to guys singing Barbra Streisand songs, so hearing me sing "Why Can't I Be a Member of the Brat Pack" went over pretty well. But there wasn't really a market for my comedic songs, and I needed to work, so I turned my attention to other things. And thankfully, I ended up having a decent career in TV shows and commercials. In the mid-2000s, I had written some comedic essays that I tried to get published with no luck. They were good and made me chuckle almost a decade later when I found them sitting in a drawer. They weren't doing anybody any good in my drawer, and I started wondering if there was maybe a way I could get them out into the world myself. I decided to record a few of them and put them up on this cool new thing called the internet. In doing so, it kind of killed two birds with one stone. I got my writing out there, and I got to perform them. Winner, winner, chicken dinner. I was amazed at the fantastic response I got. So I began writing more of them, recording them and releasing them as one-offs until managing a bunch of singular episodes became way too much. I took an online class on how to create a podcast series. Bill came up with the series name. I did the artwork, composed and performed the theme music, and packaged them all together into the series you are hearing now, dear listener. Once a piece is written, I go into my recording studio. It's my closet. I record a bunch of takes, edit them on my PC, add the music, and publish them. 15 minutes later, I get an alert from Apple Podcasts that LOL Take 2 has a new episode. How great is that? It's like the days when I would create characters and comedy and theater in my garage and the neighbors would come and see it. Only now, the neighbors are the whole world. And the coolest thing is I'm finding my comedic voice and building a body of work over 4 hours and counting. And to be honest, it's good for my soul. I've had a bunch of amazing suggestions for ways to develop this material further, and we'll see what happens. But right now, it's out there. And the best thing is that people can listen to it whenever they want. And they don't have to buy a 2-drink minimum or listen to some guy tell hideous jokes about his wife's boobs.
LOL Take 2. LOL Take 2. LOL Take 2.